The 76-year-old who didn't budge. April 16, 2007, Blacksburg, Virginia. It was a Monday morning. Students walked to class, grabbed coffee, sat down in their seats. A completely normal start to the week at Virginia Tech. Nobody had any reason to think otherwise. At 9:40 in the morning, that changed. Sung-Hui Cho was a senior at Virginia Tech. He had spent weeks planning what he was about to do, purchasing 2 handguns legally, despite a court having previously declared him mentally ill. That same morning, he mailed a package to NBC News containing photographs of himself holding weapons and a written manifesto. Then he walked into Norris Hall carrying those 2 pistols and over 400 rounds of ammunition and chained the 3 main entrance doors shut from the inside so nobody could get out. He moved to the second floor and began firing through classroom door windows as he worked his way down the hall. In room 204, 76-year-old engineering professor Liviu Librescu was mid-lecture when the gunshots erupted outside his door. He crossed his classroom and tried his door. No lock. Librescu pressed his back against the wood, spread his feet wide on the tile. He screamed at his students to go to the windows. They ran. They twisted them open and started dropping to the ground below, some landing in bushes, some hitting concrete. Cho fired through the door. The bullets tore through the wood and struck Librescu as he held his position. His legs buckled. He did not move. The last student cleared the window frame. All 23 of his students escaped. Cho pushed the door open, stepped over Librescu's body, and shot graduate student Minal Panchal, who had refused to leave him, before firing a final shot at the fallen professor. In room 207, Cho shot Professor Christopher Bishop and 4 students before moving on. The surviving students in that room immediately barricaded the door with furniture. When Cho returned minutes later, students Caitlin Carney and Derek Odell threw their bodies against the barricade as he tried to force it open. He fired through the door and hit Caitlin in the hand. Both students held the barricade. He moved on. In room 211, a student named Emily Haas had called 911 when the shooting began and stayed on the line. When Cho entered and opened fire, she was grazed in the head by a bullet, remained conscious under her desk, and kept whispering information to dispatchers while lying completely still. She stayed on that line for 8 minutes while 11 of her classmates were killed around her. 11 minutes after Cho entered Norris Hall, police cut through the entrance chains and reached the second floor. They found him in room 211 dead from a self-inflicted gunshot. He had killed 32 people. The bombs that never went off were April 20th, 1999, Littleton, Colorado, Columbine High School. Seniors Eric Harris and Dylan Klebold had been planning this for months. Both had been arrested for theft the previous years and placed in a juvenile diversion program. That morning, they each recorded final messages to their families, fully expecting to die before the day ended. At 11:10 in the morning, they pulled into the student parking lot, removed 2 homemade propane bombs from their trunks, each weighing around 20 pounds, and carried them into the cafeteria where hundreds of students were eating lunch. They placed them beneath tables, set the timers for 11:17, and walked back out to their cars to wait. The timers passed 11:17, then 11:18, then 11:19. Nothing happened. After 5 minutes of silence, they grabbed rifles from their trunks and walked toward the school's west entrance. The cafeteria full of students below had no idea. At the west entrance stairway, 14-year-old Daniel Rohrbaugh was heading down with 2 friends when Eric raised his rifle and opened fire. All 3 students ran for the entrance doors. Daniel reached them first and held the door open for the others behind. Eric shot him in the back. Daniel collapsed with his hand still on the door. Inside the cafeteria, teacher Dave Sanders heard the shots, climbed onto a chair, and shouted for everyone to run. Over 100 students cleared through kitchen exits before Harris and Klebold reached the room. Sanders ran upstairs to warn more students. Harris and Klebold followed the sound of his footsteps and shot him twice in the back and neck. He collapsed outside the science room as blood spread beneath him. Teacher Rich Long pulled him inside. Students Aaron Hansey and Kevin Starkey pressed their shirts against the wounds and stayed with him. Harris and Klebold moved to the library, where they shot 17-year-old Patrick Ireland twice in the head, paralyzing the left side of his body. At 12:08 in the afternoon, they returned to the library, sat down among the shell casings on the floor, and each died from self-inflicted gunshot. Police heard the shots but held outside for nearly 3 hours, concerned about the bombs still inside the building. By the time SWAT officers reached the science room at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, Dave Sanders had bled to death. Aaron and Kevin had been pressing their hands against his wounds for over 3 hours. Earlier, Patrick Ireland had regained consciousness, crawled across the library floor to a broken window, and dropped into the arms of SWAT officers positioned below. Harris and Klebold killed 12 students, and Dave Sanders. Columbine High School renamed its softball field after Sanders and established a scholarship in his name. A memorial stone marks the exact spot where Daniel Rohrbaugh held the door open for his classmates. The security guard who walked forwards. March 21st, 2005, Red Lake, Minnesota. 16-year-old Jeff Wise shot his grandfather, a tribal police sergeant, and his grandfather's companion at home that morning. He took the police weapons and the squad car and drove 2 miles to Red Lake Senior High School. At 2:49 in the afternoon, he rammed the squad car into the school's front entrance. Security guard Derek Brune was sitting unarmed at his desk near the metal detector when he saw Wise climb out of the car holding a shotgun. His fellow guard Leanne Grant screamed at him to run. Derek stood up and walked directly toward Wise. Wise raised the shotgun and fired twice at point-blank range. Derek collapsed dead. Leanne ran deeper into the building, screaming warnings as Wise fired shots down the the hallway behind her. 15-year-old Thurleen Stillday burst from a classroom and ran ahead of Leanne toward the exit. Weiss fired down the hallway and hit her from behind. She fell bleeding on the floor. Leanne kept running, pushing students toward the exits. In another hallway, 62-year-old teacher Neva Rogers saw students running from the gunfire, and at 2:51, Weiss reached that door, shot through the glass panel, reached through the broken glass, unlocked it from the inside, and walked in. Neva Rogers stood up and began praying aloud. Weiss walked to her and shot her multiple times in the head. 15-year-old Jeffrey May, a 300-pound freshman, crossed the room and grabbed Weiss and tried to stab him with a pencil, the only thing he had. Weiss shot him twice in the neck and once in the jaw, partially paralyzing him. But the attack gave the other students enough time to clear the room. At 2:54 in the afternoon, officers responding to 911 calls entered through the damaged entrance and spotted Weiss in the main hallway. They opened fire, hitting him 3 times. He staggered back toward the study hall, shot 2 more students hiding inside, then killed himself. The attack lasted 9 minutes and killed 9 people. The Red Lake community holds an annual remembrance walk every March 21st in honor of Derek Brune and Neva Rogers, the veteran who held the door alone. October 1st, 2015, Roseburg, Oregon. Umpqua Community College. 26-year-old Chris Harper Mercer walked into Snyder Hall carrying a backpack containing 2 handguns. He pulled the guns from his bag. 43-year-old nursing student Serena Moore saw him through the window and wheeled her chair toward the door to try to lock it. Raised a handgun and shot her multiple times in the abdomen. She slumped forward bleeding. He stepped over her wheelchair and entered. 18 students and 67-year-old Professor Lawrence Levine were inside. Harper Mercer fired a shot into the ceiling and ordered everyone to the floor. Professor Levine stood. Harper Mercer walked to him, raised the gun to his face, and fired at point-blank range. In the fitness classroom next door, connected by an interior door, 30-year-old Army veteran Chris Mintz heard the shots, ran to the connecting door, planted himself against it, spread his arms across the frame, and held it. His classmates grabbed their belongings and ran out the rear exit while Mintz held his position. He then left the door and ran to the library down the hallway, burst through the doors yelling for everyone to get out, and 20 students cleared the building. He ran back toward classroom 15 and found a wounded student bleeding in the hallway. Harper Mercer stepped out of the classroom and saw Mintz kneeling there. Mintz looked up and told him it was his son's 6th birthday. Harper Mercer shot him 7 times, shattering both femurs. Mintz collapsed to the floor. Detectives Joe Caney and Todd Spingath arrived at Snyder Hall. They entered the hallway, spotted Harper Mercer, and when he raised his weapon toward them, both detectives fired, hitting him in the torso. He staggered back into the classroom and exchanged fire with officers from inside for 2 more minutes before dying from a self-inflicted gunshot wound to the head. 9 people were killed. Chris Mintz survived 7 gunshot wounds with both femurs shattered. The 4 minutes in Uvalde, February 14, 2008. DeKalb, Illinois, Northern Illinois University. 27-year-old Stephen Kazmierczak was a former graduate student at the university. That afternoon, he walked into Cole Hall carrying a guitar case, went backstage in the lecture hall, opened the case, and pulled out a 12-gauge shotgun and a 9mm handgun. Inside the auditorium, 120 students sat in tiered rows facing the stage. 26-year-old instructor Joe Peterson was at the front teaching an oceanography class. He raised the shotgun and fired at Peterson from 40 feet away. The blast hit him in the shoulder and chest, spinning him backward. He collapsed against the door and stayed there, bleeding. Kazmierczak fired 5 more shotgun blasts into the tiered seats. 20-year-old sophomore Ryan Mace, sitting in the 4th row, was struck across the face, neck, and shoulder. She dropped to the floor between the seats, closed her eyes, and didn't move. Kazmierczak paused to reload the shotgun. In that moment, dozens of students who had been hiding beneath desks ran for the rear exits. He dropped the shotgun, drew the handgun, and walked down the center aisle firing at the students running ahead of him. Several fell just feet from the exit doors. He walked the entire length of the auditorium, stepping over bodies, and passed directly by Ryan, lying motionless between the seats without stopping. He walked back to the center of the stage, raised the handgun to his right temple, and fired. Police arrived within 2 minutes. 5 students were dead, and 17 others were wounded, including Peterson, collapsed by the locked exit, and Ryan still motionless between the seats. Both were rushed to hospital and survived after surgery. The lunch table nobody should have sat at. October 24th, 2014, Marysville, Washington. Marysville Pilchuck High School. 15-year-old Jalen Freiberg had been struggling for weeks after his ex-girlfriend Zoe Galasso began dating his cousin Andrew Freiberg. That morning, he sent text messages to Zoe, Andrew, and 5 other friends asking them to meet him at their usual lunch table. They showed up. They sat down together, and Freiberg walked over, pulled a .40 caliber handgun from his waistband, and shot Zoe in the head. Then 14-year-old Gia Soriano. Then 14-year-old Shaylee Chuckle-Naskett. Then Andrew, and then his cousin Nate Hatch in the jaw. Freiberg stood at the table with trembling hands, fumbling to reload, when first-year teacher Megan Silberberger heard the shots from her office next to the cafeteria. She ran through the door into the room, saw Freiberg holding the gun, and ran directly toward him. Freiberg raised the gun to his own head and fired before she could reach him. Marysville-Pilchuck High School holds an annual memorial walk in honor of the victims and in recognition of what she did that afternoon. The teacher who played dead, May 24, 2022, Uvalde, Texas, Robb Elementary School. Salvador Ramos was 18 years old. That morning, he shot his grandmother in the face during an argument, left her on the floor, took her truck and rifle, and drove to the elementary school. At 11:28 in the morning, he crashed into a ditch near the school, climbed out, and walked across the parking lot in plain view carrying his rifle. Nobody stopped him before he entered the building. In room 111, teacher Arnulfo Reyes saw Ramos step through the doorway, holding the rifle, and screamed at his students to get under the tables and play dead. Then he ran to stand between them and the door. Ramos shot him in the arm, and the impact spun him to the floor, face down. Ramos walked past him toward the tables where the children were hiding. Arnulfo heard the gunfire. Ramos walked back to where Arnulfo lay motionless and shot him in the back. Arnulfo remained completely still and listened to the footsteps move toward the door, connecting to the classroom next door. In room 112, teachers Eva Morales and Irma Garcia heard the shots through the connecting door and immediately pushed their 22 students against the back wall. Ramos entered through that connecting door before they could lock it. Both teachers threw themselves over students seated at desks. Ramos shot Eva twice in the back and Irma 3 times. Both women collapsed onto the children beneath them. 10-year-old Amarie Jo Garza grabbed Eva Morales' cell phone, crouched behind a desk, and dialed 911. Ramos saw her and shot her in the head 4 minutes after entering the building. Ramos walked to the center of room 112 and sat down. Outside, police officers had gathered in the parking lot and positioned themselves 15 feet from the classroom doors. For 77 minutes, they did not breach. Inside, wounded children bled on the floor. At 12:50 in the afternoon, a Border Patrol tactical team breached the doors and shot Ramos multiple times where he sat. Ramos had killed 19 children and both teachers in 4 minutes of shooting. The intercom that saved the building. December 14th, 2012. Newtown, Connecticut. Sandy Hook Elementary School. 20-year-old Adam Lanza shot his mother as she slept in their home that morning. He loaded her rifle into her car and drove to Sandy Hook Elementary. He arrived carrying hundreds of rounds of ammunition. At 9:35 in the morning, classroom doors across the building had been locked for 5 minutes. They locked automatically every morning at 9:30. Lanza fired through the glass entrance. The crack of shattering glass traveled through the open microphone into every single classroom in the building simultaneously. Principal Don Hochsprung and school psychologist Mary Sherlock were in the office when they heard the shots. They ran into the hallway and found Lanza standing inside the shattered entrance. They screamed warnings. Their voices broadcast through the still live intercom to every teacher and student in the building. Lanza shot them both. They died instantly. First grade teacher Victoria Soto heard it and moved her students into a closet and closed the door. When Lanza entered her classroom and demanded to know where the children were, Soto told him they were in the gymnasium. Several students escaped by running past Lanza while Soto held his attention. Teacher Caitlin Roig heard the warning and moved her 14 students into the bathroom, pushed a storage cabinet against the door, and covered the door window. Lanza moved through the building, trying door after door. When police entered the building, they found him dead in an empty classroom from a self-inflicted gunshot wound. He had killed 20 children and 6 adults. In February 2013, President Barack Obama awarded the Presidential Citizens Medal